So that was a little bit of a motivation for me, right? And what we would call that is an extrinsic or an outside factor that was sort of pushing me right towards that. But I invite you to see, I'm very curious to see what we have in terms of our motivations. What drew us towards post-secondary? So again, I've put that link right into the chat there, and hopefully you'll have an opportunity. Wonderful. Yes, we have our first response. Thank you very much. These are anonymous responses as well, right? So it is a judgment-free zone. Please share earnestly, share openly. And I see our first one was to improve the standard of living. Post-secondary, going to college, going to university, there's a financial benefit. Now, I don't know the data worldwide, but I know in Canada, it's about an 11% return on investment. So every year after you've graduated, you earn 11% back of that initial investment, right? So after a lifetime of working, it is financially beneficial. And I'm just assuming standard of living means strictly financially. That's a perfectly good motivation. I see the ambition to gain further knowledge, break generational barriers, and get that quality job. Fantastic. I want us to store in the back of our minds that comment about the ambition to gain further knowledge, because I think we're going to talk a little bit about that. I see going to post-secondary would make me one of very few family members to have a college education, to upgrade myself in a field. I'm a police officer. This would help me provide better service. Fantastic. Yeah, sometimes it's not just our own experience, but that of our collective, our family, or our social group, right? Absolutely. I see. I've always been interested in the career path I chose and the economic gains that go with that. Absolutely. Accumulating a large knowledge, getting a stable financial life, exploring career opportunities with my degree. This is a fantastic group of or collection of different motivations. And I see a lot of it is around improving where we are, improving our opportunities. And I'll stop sharing this part, but I want to thank everyone very much for participating in that. And I see across this diversity of motivations, right? No two of us are going to have exactly the same motivations. You might not have tried to escape hay season the way I wanted to, but we all have all of these different ideas and motivations behind us. So what I'd like to do is I'm going to bring up my presentation now, and I will share that with everyone. And I think there's quite a snappy title here. I quite like the title. I don't get credit for this, but it's Your Education, Your Power. And this is really what I want to talk about today, this message of us taking control of our education, both formally when we're at college or at university or in post-secondary generally, but education also meaning beyond just the boundaries of learning in our specific degrees or diplomas, and taking control of our learning as we move through life. So with that wonderful introduction I already received, I don't need to tell you too much about what I do, but in my biography, it mentioned a little bit about the work I've done outside of the history department, where my academic research is on grassroots political movements and different groups of people that get together to share powerful opportunities for advancement for a whole collective group. But a lot of work I've done in post-secondary is in academic integrity offices. And back starting in about December of last year, academic integrity offices were having a very difficult time understanding what to do with this emerging artificial intelligence technology. I'm not going to cover all of the aspects of how artificial intelligence works today. I'm not going to cover aspects of the technology behind that, but we do have an opportunity in our question and answer period. And for a period of time, while I was supporting myself in post-secondary, I worked as a manager of a software team. So I have a little bit of technical background as well, but there is probably many on the call today that have much more experience than I do, so we can do a little bit of collaborative learning. What I want to share a little bit to start is the idea of intrinsic motivation in higher education. I asked you to share what motivated you to pursue a post-secondary education or pursue higher education. And I heard a range of responses, but I heard in quite a few of your responses, the idea of improvement, growing, continuous learning, curiosity, and I think this is wonderful. I also heard a little bit about the idea of earnings and career, and at least in my case, I was willing to admit I wasn't so excited about a future of baling hay, right? So I was curious about maybe moving away from that. When we talk about motivation in education, a lot of theorists like to talk about the difference between intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. Intrinsic being motivation that comes from within because it's personally rewarding. It is satisfying a part of us that has to do with curiosity, that has to do with a sense of excitement or wonder. And this is different from maybe extrinsic factors, external factors, whether it's achieving an award, maybe in school, in higher education, we're maybe chasing a letter grade or a numeric grade. But these are the external factors that are pushing us along rather than those internal intrinsic factors that are pushing us along. Now, there's an interesting study that was published a couple of years ago by the authors here, and I have the citation at the end by Ryan and DC, published back in 2020, and they talk about us understanding intrinsic motivation as comprised of 3 components. That intrinsic motivation is best fostered, or we can build intrinsic motivation when learners have a sense of autonomy. When it's not just a one-size-fits-all experience, but each individual learner can navigate their learning or meet learning outcomes in a way that best expresses their abilities and their skills and their knowledge, but also what they're interested in. It's also relatedness, the idea that students can see the applicability of what they're learning to future occupations. So if you're learning, say, law and security, you can see that application to your career in policing, like the one sharing opportunity we had a little bit earlier, but also relatedness between different disciplines. So for example, if you're learning about mathematics and you're seeing the application of mathematics when you're designing computer software, you can see that relatedness. The more we have relatedness, the greater intrinsic motivation is fostered. And the last is the idea of competence. We as learners want to feel competent, and we want to feel competent early on. If we assign for a learner, if we experience as a learner an assessment that's very, very advanced at the beginning, we're given a test on advanced topics when we haven't learned the basics, we're not going to feel very competent. And this is going to demotivate us. But if we can build a sense of competence, that we can do things with what we're learning as we're learning them, this again reinforces that intrinsic, that internal motivation that's going to help us succeed. Intrinsic motivation is maybe part of the story of why we choose higher education. Extrinsic motivation is also part of that choice as well, those internal, those external factors. But if we can foster intrinsic motivation, it's going to drive us to continue to learn even as we move beyond our degrees and diplomas. So why do I bring this up? Well, it has to do with evaluations. And one of the questions I often ask myself as an educator is, why do assessments, why do evaluations matter? So when I am talking about evaluations, this is a term that encompasses all sorts of types of activities where we're measuring our learning. So things like quizzes or tests or exams, things like practicums, practical demonstrations, labs, things like essays or written assignments, all of these different types of activities fall under that banner of evaluations. And I think sometimes as learners, we can be a little bit demotivated by evaluations. When we encounter a series of exams, for example, it can feel a little bit stressful, and it can feel a little bit frustrating even that we're having to study and cram and encounter all of this stress. And we wonder why we have to do this. Is this just a hoop that we must jump through because that is how education is structured? There's a cartoon here from the Boston Globe that sort of encapsulates this idea that a test is something that students must encounter. And if this was, it was a test of the education system, but if it was a real emergency, we'd find a better solution than more and more tests, right? So a little bit of a joke there, but certainly that idea that as learners and sometimes as educators, we are administering or encountering evaluations just for the sake of doing them. But I want you to think from the perspective of a learner here and an open learner. What is the point of an evaluation? Why do we want to complete tests? Why do we want to complete evaluations? And the answer is because they give us a sense of measurement. Evaluations help us measure our learning. If our goal is to develop an understanding of the world around us, or build some technical skills, or work towards a future career, maybe where we'll have higher earnings in that career, we need to measure ourselves, measure that we are learning what we're supposed to learn, that we can meet educational outcomes of our courses and programs. And if we can embrace this idea that evaluations are not external or extrinsic factors in our education, but they are measurements that help us foster our intrinsic motivation, our internal motivation, we will really change our thoughts on how we learn and how we educate. So we've talked a little bit about intrinsic motivation. We've talked a little bit about why evaluations matter and how we can use those to measure our own learning. So now let's turn to technology. So when it comes to that idea of measurements for learning, does applying technology help that or harm that? And this is something that academic integrity offices and educators around the world have really been grappling with. And I think learners have been grappling with this question as well with the advent of academic integrity. Now, it's not, with the advent of artificial intelligence. See, there's two AIs, academic integrity, artificial intelligence, and sometimes my wires get crossed on those two. So with artificial intelligence, this is the first time that education as a sector has had to wrestle or think about different technologies. We were doing the same thing about 20 years ago with the question of laptops and devices in classrooms. And maybe 15 years before that, when I was a younger learner, we were thinking about the idea of calculators in classrooms, and were calculators harming mathematics education. And before that, there was the challenge of thinking about whether or not chalkboards, right, and using chalk or using whiteboards, if these were harming students' education. This is a very long-standing conversation about the relationship between technology and learning, and if it helps or harms our ability to measure our learning. So I want to share with you a very simple definition of technology. And technology is best defined as simply a solution to a problem. Technology is not good, it is not bad, it is just a solution to a problem. It is a tool. And whether technology will harm or help us measure our learning and foster our intrinsic motivation, it depends on how we use the tool. So what do I mean by this? Well, I'll give you a very simple, very basic diagram here. We have two tools and two uses. We have teeth and we have nails, and we have dental instruments and we have hammers. Now, if we need to work with the teeth, well, we have two tools to choose from, right? We can use the dental instruments or we can use the hammer. Both of those are tools we can absolutely use, but one of those is going to lead to a very bad outcome for the teeth, right? If we use a tool that's not designed for that use, right? Similarly, if we're trying to hammer a nail into a piece of wood using that little dental mirror, it's not going to work very well, right? We can use the tool in that manner. We're just not using the tool effectively, and it's not going to produce the outcome that we want. We're going to have a bad measurement. We must use the right tools for the right job. So we talked about intrinsic motivation. Let's foster that sense of curiosity and learning from within. And we talked about the idea of evaluations as a way that we can measure that learning, so we know if we're growing, we know if we're meeting the outcomes we need to meet. And now we've talked about technology being a tool, and if we use the right tool for the right job, interesting things can happen. So I'm going to show you with ChatGPT. ChatGPT is a tool. And the question a lot of us have been thinking about in the sector of education is whether or not ChatGPT is a good tool or a bad tool. And what I've said from the very beginning is this is the wrong way to think about this. We need to think about how we can use ChatGPT as the right tool for the right job. So what do we want to do? And I think the most concerning thing I've seen is that we're using this tool incorrectly, or we are using it for the wrong job. We are using the hammer on the teeth, and this is not a good thing. What we are asking ChatGPT to do over and over and over is create original creative content. This was me yesterday. ChatGPT, can you please write me a best-selling novel? Now, this was actually just an error. But I thought it was kind of illustrative of the point. And so I left it in. Something went wrong. ChatGPT does not do well when we ask it to produce original content. Now, occasionally I encounter students that are looking to use ChatGPT to write creative or original content and then submit that as their own. There are technical reasons why this doesn't work very well. One of which being the way that ChatGPT creates content is without any check on verification. And so you have something that looks like it's good quality, but actually the content behind it is hallucinated. There's no quality behind it. There is no actual relationship between the content and the outcome. But I think worse than this, if we are asking ChatGPT to do the work for us, we have no way to measure whether or not we are learning and growing and meeting those learning outcomes that we need to meet. So if our outcome is to write a best-selling novel, and we've asked ChatGPT, this technology, to do that, we won't know if we are growing. We have used the tool incorrectly. We cannot measure our learning, and therefore we will lose our sense of intrinsic motivation from within. But there is a good way to use this tool. There's actually lots of different good ways to use lots of different artificial intelligence tools. But I'm going to share one that I think is underutilized. And it is underutilized by learners, partly because educators, I think, are afraid to teach this to learners. And it is even more underutilized by educators. I'm going to stop sharing for a second, and I'm going to share a hyperlink. I'm going to give you a hyperlink. I don't expect you necessarily to read this entire article. This is an article from the Harvard Business Review. But if you get a chance, I invite you just for the next 20 or 30 seconds, if you click on that link and open up the article, you can see just very, very quickly scroll it. Now imagine yourself that you are in a class and I've just assigned this to you. I'm your professor and I say, I want you to read this article. Let's imagine maybe now this is an article that is written for a general audience. Now let's imagine that it's a technical article, an article on computer programming or chemistry or biology or some subject where maybe there's very specific technical language being deployed here. And so if I'll bring up the article here. Yes, here we have here the article with lots of text. I know when I was in school, it took me a really long time to learn to read. I knew how to read words, but it took me a long time to learn how to read entire blocks of text so that it didn't take me a very long time. This is a lot of text to read, right? And it was a very difficult skill for me to learn over time, how to take notes. What's important? What's not important? What do I need to remember? What do I not need to remember? Because there's a couple thousand words here, and they all seem kind of important to me, right? And again, this is true for learners, this is true for educators, this is true for all of us. We struggle sometimes with these things, and what that means is maybe we're shying away, or we're staying away from encountering all of this good knowledge that's out there. So what can we do with Chat GPT to help us with this conundrum, with this challenge? We don't want it to write a best-selling novel for us, but what if we ask it to help us with our research? Here's a prompt that we can use. For example, I did this yesterday. ChatGPT, help me structure my research. I will give you text from an academic research article. Please format the article for me and give me some columns. In this case, I said argument, evidence, conclusions. And hey, yeah, use some plain language so I can understand what we're talking about. And ChatGPT does really well. When we ask ChatGPT to create original content, it puts together random strings of words. It doesn't really know what to do with that, so it just draws from the large language model that it was trained on and puts together strings of words. And they aren't really meaningful strings of words. If we give it content and give it a command to execute with that content, it does very well. It is designed to do masterful work with this. So what would this look like with that article? I hope, again, you had just a chance just not to really worry about reading the content, but just to get a sense. We have these big block paragraphs. We're maybe feeling a little bit nervous that we have to, nobody signed up for a reading hour here. Why are we having to read this? Well, let me show you what I'm going to do. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to open up ChatGPT. And here we are. Okay, I'm going to open up ChatGPT, and in my prompt, I'm going to write that prompt. Now I've pre-prepared this just to save us all a little bit of time, so you don't have to watch me mistype and correct everything here. But I say, ChatGPT, can you please summarize an article in plain language? I want you to give me the author's overall argument in 2 sentences. So I don't have to read the whole thing. Just give me a 2-sentence summary. And then I want you to create a table with columns showing me the author's points, the evidence that supports each point, and the conclusion that they draw from the points. So if I execute that, all right. So what ChatGPT is now asking me for is just the text of the article. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go to that article, and I'm going to hit copy, and I'm going to hit paste. And I'll just say, now you have to watch me mistype things. And I paste it. And ChatGPT does its things. And here we go. So rather than having to read all of those paragraphs, we have the author argues that intrinsic motivation, the internal drive to complete tasks because they're interesting or enjoyable, is essential for success at work. The author highlights 6 ways to tap into this intrinsic motivation, including understanding the value of your tasks, performing easy tasks promptly, avoiding mindless repetition, and helping colleagues channel frustrations into solutions, turning boring meetings into learning outcomes. Yeah, pretty cool, huh? I see the comment there from Akina. Yeah, that's awesome. Yes. Again, I'll reinforce this point because I think I've said it a number of times, but I'll keep saying it. I say it to my colleagues and I say it to my students. If we use this tool for the right job, it does amazing things. Try this, not just try it with this specific article, but try it with other things. Try it with news articles. Try it with technical journal articles, things that are challenging. So we get the author's overall argument without having to read all those thousands of words. Now I took the liberty of reading that article, and I can confirm this is a good summary, but I think the table is really where the magic happens. This is the content of the article, stripped down, so some of those filler words have been removed, but it's telling us what the author's points are, right? It's telling us what the author is using to substantiate their overall argument, and then the evidence that they provide to support that claim. And then the conclusions that they draw from that. Now, I just picked these points, evidence, conclusion, because that's a way I like to think in my own research. But you can have 5 columns, you can have 10 columns, you can have 1 column. It's entirely up to you. What we're doing is we're asking ChatGPT to change the structure of information. This is the right tool for the right job. And we even have this nice little blurb at the bottom. The author's main conclusion is that developing intrinsic motivation is crucial for success at work, as it leads to personal growth and satisfaction. External rewards have limited effectiveness, while intrinsic motivation evolves with an individual's growth and inspires them to do great work. So I hope you feel inspired to play a little bit. Yes, fantastic. I think Suzette doing a little bit of a demo. Wonderful. Yes, that's great. So doing that as a little bit of a demo. I see Sarah's, I'll never have to read a 50-page case again. Absolutely. This helps us structure information in a way that we can read it. One of the exercises I did in my class last week was a debate. It was a history class, and we were debating a controversial figure. And I had 2 newspaper articles from a few years ago. I'll just stop sharing for a moment. And I assigned the students into 2 groups. And I wanted the students to either be for this person or against this person in terms of their accomplishments. Again, a very controversial figure. And the students were struggling a little bit with encountering all of this content and these big, long articles. And so I showed them how to do this. And I said, this is a good way of using ChatGPT. And the students were able to sustain this dialogue, one point against the next. And eventually students started structuring their arguments into tables using this tool. Very, very powerful. I see Suzette say in the chat as well, we can use this to create rubrics. One of the things that I like to do is I like to give it a bit of structure. Pardon me. And so let's say I know I want to evaluate student work in terms of the writing techniques, and I want a 5-point scale. And what I want 5 to be is exceptional writing technique, and I want 1 or a 0 to be very low writing technique. And then I'll invite ChatGPT to give me some examples of things I could include in a rubric. I'm yet to fully trust ChatGPT, because if I ask it just to come up with the rubric without any structure, again, that content, it's just going to be putting together strings of words. But if I give it that structure and say, help me shape this, it does an amazing job. So this will help us. Again, if we're asking it to write a novel, write an essay for us, we lose the ability to measure our learning, and the content's going to be very low quality. But if we give it work to do, it does a very, very nice job with that. So that's what I wanted to show you, really, that one technique. But I think ChatGPT said it well anyways, that idea of intrinsic motivation, measuring our learning, it's going to lead to greater satisfaction. We're drawing back to the very reason we went to post-secondary in the first place, and we're fostering that for students as well as educators. And we are going to have greater satisfaction in our learning and a more dedicated commitment to lifelong learning. I think I've talked enough. And so it is time for us to move to a little bit of a question and answer opportunity, I think, I hope. What's happening here? My screen has gone strange. Yes, perhaps there we are. Okay, so I'll pause there, and if we have any questions or comments, I would love to hear them.
Ladies and gentlemen, please feel free to type your question in the chat or raise your hand using the feature presented by this application, and we'll go ahead and identify you. So Ryan Bennett is asking, so how have you tackled ensuring data accuracy so far with GPT or any other AI models?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question. in terms of data accuracy, how I'll interpret that is whether or not the contents that is being produced sort of reflects a verifiable result. Is that the case? I know early on, especially with some of the language-based or any artificial intelligence product that have been trained on a large language model was really, really struggling with the results where you would say, what does 2 + 2 equal? And the model would very, very confidently say it equals 5, right? This was one of the challenges, but we see this as well, for example, in ChatGPT. If I ask ChatGPT to produce for me an essay and I say add citations, it will do a great job, right? I'll give it a question, right? Tell me about why Bob Marley was the greatest musician of all time and give me inline citations. It will do that, but it will make up academic sources, right? So there's always going to be an accuracy problem. And back, it was probably by January, folks started to assign the label to that of hallucinations, that artificial intelligence will hallucinate. It will produce content it's very confident to be true, but it has a very low reliability and veracity to it. So what do we do about that? Part of the challenge is there's going to be a little bit of a delay between the models that the technology is being trained on. And now we see this if we ask it for current events. A lot of the models will say, well, we're only trained up till 2021, so we can't really comment on that. I find Bing's Copilot is better for that. I was a lifelong Googler. Oh, I shouldn't say lifelong Googler because I've been around longer than Google has. But I was a dedicated Googler. Since Bing released Copilot, I use Bing exclusively as my search engine. I ask it to find me content, and what I get in response is results that can be verified through additional links. So that's helpful. But it's a challenging question, Ryan. I think on the side of validating and verifying the content that's being produced, I have very low confidence, which is why I discourage for students and for educators to use artificial intelligence to produce original content. But structuring information that we give it, A+, it will do an excellent job with. So I hope that answers your question. I see a couple more came in, so I'll quiet down on that one.
Susan Morrison is asking, what's your stance on the use of this tool to help researchers? And also, what is the percentage of usage, such as a tool, as a tool at your institution?
Yeah, wow. Two great questions, related questions. I don't, in terms of the second part, what's the percentage of use? I don't know. When I do faculty workshops, I would say very roughly, it's not scientific of me to say, but I'll say very impressionistically, it's about, the room is divided into thirds. There's 1/3 that is very proficient with the technology and is using it for all sorts of administrative tasks. Using it, I saw your comment earlier, Suzette, about the idea of, having some prompts, having some inputs, and having ChatGPT help us structure different levels of learning outcomes in Bloom's taxonomy, which is a fantastic use. So I think there would be maybe 1/3 in the room that's doing that. There's 1/3 that maybe they've done a little bit of learning and reading, maybe they've signed up for an account, maybe they haven't, but they're not really sure beyond kind of a very, very basic novelty. They haven't really used the technology, but they're aware. And then there's 1/3 walking into the room that typically maybe they've heard about Midjourney, or maybe they've heard about Bard, but not really the other technologies, not really any way to use them. So roughly in terms of percent, I'd say maybe based on my experience, 1/3 is using it well, and another 1/3 maybe occasionally plays around. In terms of my stance on the use to help researchers, I say something, I love Mohawk College. I love where I work. I think Mohawk College is a fantastic college. But I think here at Mohawk and at most colleges and universities around the world, we're focused so much on the potential for student misuse, to the neglect of other interesting questions, of research ethics around using this technology, or the relationship between employment law and employment contract, and using this to perform some of your duties? I think those are interesting questions. Frankly, we probably need case law to help define some of those, or academic misconduct proceedings for researchers to really shape those. So my stance is, I would be very, very cautious to advise use beyond structuring information for any researcher. So again, amazing question.
And our next question comes from Akina Martin, who says, what other features does ChatGPT have that can assist with study? For example, there are some AI models that read articles.
Yeah. Really good question. So if we're thinking of studying, one of the things we could do, let's say we're taking a class on human resources, and we're learning about how to manage recruiting, how to hire people, and we know that there's a unit test coming up. What we could do is we could say, ChatGPT, I'm taking a class on human resources and employment law. I have a test coming up on recruiting. Come up with 5 test questions, and I'm going to write answers to them. And I want you to see if you can evaluate if my answers would line up with how you would answer it. So we can use it kind of as a study buddy. Again, the content's going to be a little bit, we should be cautious of its ability to evaluate our content. Or we could invite ChatGPT to, beyond that, we could invite it to help us structure our notes in a new way. I know there's a lot of high quality academic literature on how the way we approach and study information is ineffective, that we should rather, usually what we do is a block study where we'll start with topic A, then topic B, then topic C, where we should interleave a little bit of ABC, and then the next study session, a little bit of ABC. ChatGPT can help us interleave our studying if we gave it our notes and said, structure these in a way where I have to interleave my studying. So that's what some of the things we could do. I think it's a really interesting question. We are only starting to uncover all of the different ways. I can add as well, maybe with one quick anecdote, and it'll actually, I think, help also with the next question. My assignments in my class up till this year were fairly standard, typically, depending on the class, but typically some sort of essay that students would have to write. And I've changed all of those. Students are now using ChatGPT in a history assignment. Previously, I would ask students to write, pick an interesting historical figure and write about them. And what I've done instead, starting this year, is students go to ChatGPT, they ask ChatGPT to impersonate that historical figure, they have a conversation with them, and then they make a video to me about how the chat was or was not historically accurate. So they're meeting the same outcomes, just in a very different way. So there's all sorts of things we can do.
We're going over to YouTube now. And we have a question from Dr. Donna Powell Wilson, our executive director, who is asking, is there enough information available to educators for promoting the responsible use of AI?
I feel like, I want to answer yes and no at the same time to that. I think there's a lot of information in a lot of different sources, way too spread out right now, frankly. If I don't mean to be critical, but I think academic integrity networks have been working on sharing resources, but they're just spread all over the place. I'm on, I think, 3 different Google groups of different researchers that are trying to share, cobble together packaged information. But it always feels a little bit haphazard, that we don't have a common understanding. I know there's some schools, certainly last winter, and some school networks around the world that took a very hard line on this. A number of prominent French and Australian universities, for example, declared that they were banning the use of this technology. And then very quietly, I think about 6 weeks later, they undid all of those bans because there was no way to enforce it, right? I'm most interested when schools and school networks are taking a much more permissive approach and saying, how can we empower educators how can we empower students to use this tool responsibly? And I think that's when interesting things can happen. But in terms of like a central repository or a central place to go to collect that information, to review it, until we have common consensus, I think that would be hard to do. So I want to say no, but there are some really good researchers out there. The one that I listen to the most, her name is Tricia Bertram Gallant. She is the academic integrity director at the University of California, and also another researcher named Sarah Elaine Eaton at the University of Calgary, who's another amazing researcher. And the work that they're producing has helped shape how I think about this.
Susan Morrison, again, is asking, do you have a policy for your class assignment when your students use AI tools?
Yeah, so certainly we have an academic integrity policy that says unauthorized use of technology and plagiarism is not permitted. And so there's certain types of use of these technologies that would fall under either of those. But I do have a statement in my course in which I say exactly how I invite students to use this and how I encourage students to use this. I've included a couple of screenshots and really inviting students, encouraging them to kind of follow the pathways of using the tool for responsible and effective use, and maybe leading them away from some of those dangerous or inappropriate uses. I came up with that statement, but I mean, I'd be happy to share it. It's on the Mohawk College website. They shared it as well. So, yeah.
Imani Bailey is asking, how do you find the ethical balance with relying on AI models?
Yeah. Oh man, so many great questions today. It's a really tricky question. And I think the ethical dilemma that I'm most concerned with has to do with a recent announcement about the Writers Guild of America suing the OpenAI, the company behind ChatGPT, because they suggested that the technology was trained using their collective works, right? You might have seen as well for some of the image-based software, there was a famous example, I think it was Midjourney, that was prompted to produce an image of a soccer player. It produced an image of a soccer player, but then someone else found essentially the same image that was produced by Getty Images, the largest stock photography company in the world, and they were indistinguishable. So I think the biggest concern I have about the ethics of using original content from AI is that AI itself, these technologies are just drawing from the models they've been trained on, and that that's all sorts of proprietary information. So again, if we give the technology the information we want it to structure, I think we're okay. If we're asking it to produce original content we're using, we might find ourselves in unethical grounds, or on shaky grounds at least. Oh, I think you might be muted, Delano.
Well, thank you. Thank you. So Norman Malcolm is asking, do you think the economic and social benefits of AI remain geographically concentrated primarily in the global north? If so, what are some ways in which we can spread the benefit to the global south, especially small island developing states?
What an amazing question. I am so impressed by the questions today. This is such an impressively weighty question that I'm afraid to answer because I won't do it justice. And I think there's a lot of reasons to be skeptical of the way that economic and educational and social systems are structured so that they benefit the global north. And so I think if I just gave a really, really happy, shiny Pollyanna answer of like, yeah, oh no, it'll be fine, equity around the world, I think that would be a little bit dishonest. Inherent to technologies, as they're designed by Silicon Valley, by a very specific group of people, they are designed to benefit and enhance the economic, social, political interests of that group, right? This is something that's, I think, a fairly open secret about Silicon Valley, and something that they deserve lots of scrutiny for. But I think in the educational context, if we use this as a tool to empower learners to grow beyond just the boundaries of the very limited amount of time we have with them, and teach students how to use this tool to encounter and structure information, to build learning. I think of the ways that students can encounter and build computer programming with this software. This can unlock tremendous potential opportunity that will easily leak or escape through national borders. So again, like, what an impressive question. I'm sure I haven't done justice to all of the many avenues, but just in terms of my initial thoughts there, I hope that's a little bit helpful.
I believe that is, well, this is another question from Mr. Aldin Crew, who is asking, GPT0.me is used to detect the use of ChatGPT and Bard. What mechanism do you use or would recommend to combat improper use?
So I'm very concerned about the use of any sort of detection software. Partly, now I don't know if it's GPT-0 or there's another product called Zero GPT, and just to be confusing, there's a few other open source detection software out there. There's a company called Turnitin that has a product for sale that schools can use. And I'm really skeptical of how they work. If anybody here's a technical person, they're binary classifiers. And what that means for the non-technical group is what they're doing is they're going word by word and tracing any variation from a predicted baseline. That's not a good way of detecting. What I tell folks is, if you want, if you're going to use one of those tools, also put a coin in your hand, flip the coin. That is, the coin is going to be as reliable as the detector. So what do we do to combat improper use? What do we do to detect if use, if there's use, when we're asking students not to do it? The very unsatisfactory answer is we don't have a lot of punitive technology or detection software right now that's going to do much. I think we need to change the way we assess learning. I think we can go back to pen and paper. That's one option. Some of my colleagues have done that, right? I can't give digital assignments anymore, they say, right? We have to just evaluate students when they don't have devices in front of them. I've gone the other way. I've tried to incorporate ChatGPT into all of my assessments, but then the higher order work, it's very difficult. So for that assignment I said, where students are having a conversation with a historical figure and then evaluating that conversation, ChatGPT is not going to do a very good job of evaluating itself. And I'm going to see fairly apparently, even if I said that students could use it for that purpose, the quality of the outcome would be so low that it would harm their outcomes. It would harm their grades eventually, right? So again, it's very unsatisfactory. I know a lot of my colleagues are very frustrated with this, but on the detection software specifically, be very cautious.
We have another question from Ms. Shilene Gale, who is asking, how will AI impact teaching and learning in the near future? And what advice would you give educators and students just getting started with AI?
Such impressive questions today. I mean, none of us know, right? We don't know how this is going to change things. The day that ChatGPT was announced to the world was December 4th, 2022. The New York Times ran a feature. You might have seen it, right? It was a big sensational news item all over social media. Now I'll pause for a second if anyone remembers that. If you remember the headline, what did they say? How did they introduce this technology to the world? A technology that could potentially enhance equity between the global North and global South. Technology that can unlock new ways of researching, structuring information. How did they announce it to the world? They said, this is going to kill the college essay. That's how it was announced to the world, which I always thought was such a disappointing mistake on the part of the New York Times. Why not structure? Why not suggest that in a different format? Is it going to kill the college essay? Is it going to change how we assess things? I hope so. I think essays and old school assessments are outdated modes of fostering a student's sense of measuring their own learning, right? I think the change will be haphazard. I know some of my colleagues are very concerned that we will be replaced by robots. But there's a good book about this called The Non-Computable You, but how a lot of the faculties that make us human can never realistically be replaced by any sort of digital device. Our ability to be creative, our ability to be social, to foster emotional connection. And maybe so as educators, we start to change our views of ourselves from imparting technical knowledge to more like a coach, fostering that sense of curiosity, encouraging learners. But it'll be all sorts of it'll be a strange journey ahead for us, I think.
Susan Morrison is asking, do you agree that overall creation of assessment pieces must be reimagined to combat the reliance on the tool by learners?
There's a big debate playing out in the academic integrity world. And it's an old debate. It's a debate that existed a long time before before artificial intelligence. But the debates around, do we police this, or do we change what we're doing to allow use but still measure meaningful learning? And I think the folks that are encouraging the idea that use is going to be inevitable, use is okay, let's foster responsible use, often suggest that assignments can be changed to become more authentic, right? Authentic assessment. There's a book about this called Cheating Lessons by James Lang. It's a very good book. It's a great book about, actually, just about teaching in general, but Cheating Lessons. I'll just put it in the chat there, because when I read this book, it transformed how I approach my classroom. But it's this idea of authentic assessment. So what does authentic assessment mean? And when you get these academic integrity folks in the room to play out this debate, no one can really even agree on what that means. I like Lang's definition. The research I shared today, that idea of students, us fostering that intrinsic motivation in our students, by dealing with autonomy and relatedness and competence, and sort of nudging our assignments in that direction is maybe a path forward. But it's tricky. I think, yeah, I fall probably into that camp, that we do need to reimagine how we're assessing learning, and ideally in a forward way. Yeah. But I don't, like I said before, I don't like old assessment models. I find essay writing kind of outdated. Other folks would disagree with me, but that's my sense.
All right. And for next question, I believe that's all. Let's check YouTube just to make sure everything is okay. All right, I believe that is actually all. So thanks again, Dr. McDowell. What an enlightening session. But before we conclude today's webinar, let's take a moment to express our gratitude. I'd like to invite Mrs. Ava Marie Francis Reed, Curriculum Development Officer, to extend our appreciation.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Jarrett. Thank you so much, Mr. McDowell, for your expertise. You really demonstrated such in the field. We are here because we have interest in the area and we wanted to know more. There were gaps, there were deficits, and you have truly filled those gaps. So thank you. We truly appreciate your time and your effort, and we pray that you will have a good rest of the day. Thank you to everyone, all participants, our moderator, everyone from CCCJ and the member institutions. It was good having you here with us. We thank you.
Thank you all very much.
Indeed, thank you all for joining us on this incredible journey into the world of artificial intelligence in education. In closing, I'm just reminding you all that artificial intelligence is not just about machines. It's about empowering individuals and transforming our educational landscape. Together, we can create a brighter future for our students. Stay curious, stay engaged, and stay innovative. On behalf of the CCCJ, that's the Council of Community Colleges of Jamaica, I wish you all continued success and growth. Until we meet again, take care and keep pushing the boundaries of knowledge. Walk good. Hold on, just before we leave, I think this is a perfect moment for a photo opportunity. So I'm going to ask everyone to unmute, well, to turn on your cameras. Let's turn on gallery mode. This is already up on our screen. And let's take a picture together. How about that? Hello, Raymond. Hello, Paul. Hello, Ava Marie. Thank you for joining us. Kim Moy, Akita Martin, Chantel Curry, Marcia Calvin Clark. Thank you guys for opening your cameras. Giving you guys just 1 minute for more persons to join. Sarah Jones, thank you. Tajeda. And I believe Mr. McIntosh is trying to join us as well for the picture. Mr. McIntosh, who is here beside me on our team. Nastasia. Ashley Santos. 30 more seconds until we go ahead and take our screenshot. Mr. Goldburn, you're on here, right? Mr. Goldburn? Ready?
Recording in progress.
Nastasia Nesbitt, Cheryl Gill, Jason McIntosh is finally here. All right, so I guess we can work with the faces that I'm seeing. It's nice to see everyone, by the way. It's very lovely. Let's go ahead. So after 3, well, I think for some persons it would be delayed, but I'm going to still, give you guys some time to respond by saying artificial intelligence. So on 3, we're saying AI. 1, 2, 3. AI. Thanks again, everyone, and have a great day.